in front of the neighbors who were standing right at the door. Already curious because my stepmother Sienna's phone had been placed on the table with the camera still on, she set her glass down, looked straight at me, and enunciated each word as if delivering a sentence. If you walk out of this house, you won't survive 1 week. One single sentence, enough to silence the entire room, enough to turn me into a burden in the very place that used to be my home. If you've ever been belittled by people who were supposed to respect you, leave a single period so I know you understand that feeling. If you've ever been belittled among people who were supposed to respect you, if you've ever stood in a room where your dignity was tested right before everyone's eyes, leave a single period so I know you understand that feeling and are still walking with me. And if you want to hear the full story of how I got back up from that moment of public humiliation, not with anger but with clarity and justice, I would truly appreciate a subscription from you. Nighttime in Maple Court has a kind of silence very different from the house on Cedar Ridge Lane, where I lived for 35 years. Here, silence is not peace, but more like a thin mist covering up things people don't want to say directly. The wall clock ticked steadily on the faux stone wall of the dining room, each beat reminding me that for the past 2 years I had been trying to fit myself into my son's family rhythm, a rhythm never meant for a retired man like me. That dinner was what Sienna called the second anniversary of you coming to live with us, said in a tone half teasing, half commanding. On the table were dishes she claimed were made to suit an old man's taste, but all I smelled was something strange that made me miss Margaret's kitchen. Simple, lightly fragrant, never trying to impress anyone. Jacob sat across from me, his eyes showing hints of exhaustion after a week working in the city's tunnel division. The boy once had warmer eyes, but 2 years of hearing his wife whisper, "Your father isn't stable anymore," had given those eyes a constant, quiet wariness. We hadn't eaten long when Sienna placed her phone on a stand at the corner of the table, the green light of video mode reflecting off the wine glass like a bad omen. I knew she often live-streamed to show off her perfect family dinners, but tonight, for some reason, I felt a chill run up my back. Then the sentence came, still wearing that fake smile for the phone recording her. Yet each word dropped onto the dining table, like a needle falling onto already thin skin. If you walk out of this house, you won't survive 1 week. Jacob froze. Lily, my granddaughter, looked up, so startled that her fork almost slipped from her hand. And Sienna smiled thinly, the smile of someone who knows she has just thrown a stone into a lake and is waiting to see how far the ripples will spread. I set my knife down, the sound of metal tapping, porcelain ringing clearly, in a room already filled with too many things that shouldn't be spoken. "What do you mean?" I asked, not loudly, but enough to make the silence turn thick. Sienna tilted her head, a fake sympathy coating her heavily made-up face. "Sir, everyone can see you're starting to forget things. The other day you left the faucet running all night. The next day you misplaced your pills on the kitchen shelf. If you go out and live alone, what if something happens? How could we take care of it in time?" That was the moment I understood. Everything she saw was something she could easily stage. I had turned the faucet off that day. I was certain of it. I had put the pill box in the right place, but that morning, the kitchen shelf looked different. Back then, I thought I just misremembered. Now it's all linked together like the pipelines I used to inspect. One listen was enough to tell where the leak was. Sienna tapped the phone screen lightly. I noticed she was recording. Not a public live stream, but in story muted mode, video only, no audio. She didn't need audio. She only needed someone to look and see me with a displeased expression, enough to shape the narrative however she wanted. The old man causing trouble at dinner. Jacob stayed silent, his eyes avoiding mine. I realized this silence wasn't agreement or disagreement. It was the fear of a crack forming between his wife and his father. That fear, for the past 2 years, had become a rope tightening slowly around the boy's neck. I exhaled, not out of sadness, but because I understood this road was no longer meant for me. I stood up and pulled the old keychain from my coat pocket, the keychain I had kept since moving to Maple Court, even though no one ever asked whether I wanted to keep it or return it. The metal clinked together, sharp like a hammer striking a steel pipe. I placed it in the middle of the table. The front door was ajar. Lily had forgotten to close it after grabbing the pastry container. The night breeze slipped in, carrying the voices of a few neighbors walking down the hallway. They heard the keys hit the wooden surface. They looked in through the open crack. They saw me, saw Sienna holding the phone, saw Jacob lowering his face. No one said anything, but those looks were enough for me to understand. Humiliation doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes all it takes is a single moment, with witnesses. I pushed my chair back neatly, the way I had always done in technical meeting rooms throughout 40 years of work. I looked at Jacob before turning away. I'm fine. You don't need to choose a side. I just need air to breathe. For a second, the boy's face tightened, as if he wanted to say something, but his throat was caught between duty and the fear of being dissected by his wife as a husband who doesn't stand with his family. Sienna delivered one last line, soft like a whisper, but venomous enough to echo in my mind as I stepped toward the door. Go ahead. 1 week. Let's see how many days you last. I didn't turn back. I simply took the doorknob and stepped into the night unfolding before me. When the door closed behind me, I knew I had just left a house, but returned to my real life, the life Margaret once reminded me of. Never let anyone tell you you don't belong in the place you built with your own hands. The night in Evergreen Hills smelled of damp wood and cold wind from the western mountains. It was the scent of freedom, and also the scent of a coming storm. The overnight bus carried me out of the modern neighborhood, through winding roads leading to Cedar Ridge Lane, the small road on the edge of Evergreen Hills, Colorado, where I had spent more than half my life. I left Maple Court when the clock had just passed 9 in the evening, the hour when Evergreen Hills usually sank into a quiet, laced with the distinct chill of the mountain region. Streetlights cast a warm gold onto the pavement misted with dew, reflecting the silhouette of an old man past 70, walking not because he was driven out, but because he no longer wished to stay in a place that made each breath feel heavier. The overnight bus carried me away from the modern district, along twisting paths toward Cedar Ridge Lane, the little road I had spent more than half my life on. The heater hummed patiently, while my mind kept replaying the dinner earlier. Jacob's lowered gaze, Sienna's half-smile, and that sentence thin as thread, yet strong enough to crack the self-respect I had protected for decades. I wasn't angry. I only felt a strange emptiness, the kind one realizes when finally forced to admit they no longer belong in the place where they're sitting. The bus turned into the slope leading to the wooden house, number 219. The night rain wasn't heavy, but enough to glaze the road with a thin layer of moisture that made it look like it was breathing. When the wheels touched the familiar ground, I heard the soft crunch of tires, an echo of the hundreds of mornings Margaret opened the door for me after my shifts in the hydraulic control room. The house appeared beneath the pine shadows, dark but not cold. Its shape looked like an old friend standing and waiting, though it had been 2 years since I last stayed here for long. The kitchen windows still held the beige curtains Margaret loved. I always meant to replace them, but never did, perhaps because I didn't want to touch anything that belonged to her. I stepped off the bus, my shoes meeting the wooden porch with the familiar creak. The key turned once. The lock clicked softly, just like the last time I locked it before bringing Jacob and Lily to live 4 years here, when I decided to renovate the entire house, replace the old pipes, and recalibrate the heating system. After they moved to Maple Court, I kept Cedar Ridge Lane, never listing it for sale, though people offered high prices, partly because of what Margaret told me, don't sell this house, it's the final stream of our youth, and partly because I couldn't bear to see it in someone else's hands. When I flipped the switch, the hallway light came on instantly without a flicker. Every utility ran smoothly because I had kept the automatic deduction from the Home Legacy Fund. The fund Margaret and I set aside to maintain the house even when no one lived in it. It made everything logical: electricity, water, internet, heating, all functioning despite the house being empty for 2 years. I hung my coat and walked along the wooden floor. Each step was a memory. Margaret laughing as she read the morning paper, Lily running circles around the living room as a child, Jacob sawing wood beside me as we built bookshelves. Those sounds now lived only in the old planks, but the silence didn't bring sorrow. It felt more like a gentle embrace from someone who had long understood me. I reached the study. On the desk was the unfinished hydraulic system model I had once used to explain things to Jacob when he was still curious about everything. A light coat of dust covered it, but everything was intact. Only one thing had changed: the look in my eyes as I viewed it, older but clearer. I bent down and opened the bottom drawer. The hinge gave a soft groan. Inside was a dark gray safe, the kind sealed with mechanical lead locks, the one Margaret used to jokingly call the second heart of this house. I hadn't opened it since she passed. At her funeral, Evelyn Marks, her close friend, and also the family lawyer, placed an envelope from Margaret into my hand, telling me, "Open it only when you truly need an answer." I thought I would never have to, because when Margaret left, it felt as if the most painful part of my life had left with her. But tonight, after words sharper than any blade, there was a crack in my heart I couldn't ignore. I placed the envelope on the desk so gently that I could hear the faint rustle of paper. Margaret's handwriting was still as soft as ever. "Open only when your heart is betrayed." I took a deep breath. In my profession, opening a valve at the wrong moment could make a pipeline explode. But some doors, like this safe, should open only when the truth can no longer be held back. When the final number aligned, the lock released with a sound like metal dropping into deep water. The safe door opened slowly. Inside was a sealed red file folder, a spare key, and a time-faded family photo. I didn't rush to open the folder. I just looked at the photo. Me, Margaret, Jacob, and Lily, when Lily was only 3, and Margaret smiled brightly because it was the afternoon we finished assembling the backyard swing. I set the photo down and touched the red folder. The moment my fingertips touched the paper, I knew one thing for certain. This house, with its old wooden walls, with Margaret's lingering breath, with its carefully kept secrets, was waking, and so was I. The night outside the window remained dark, but inside me a small light had just turned on, like a street lamp signaling that a road must be walked, no matter how many cliffs or storms lie ahead. Leaving Maple Court hadn't made me lose my way. It had only brought me back to the place where I needed to stand to see everything clearly, all that was coming, and all that Sienna never expected. She had just awakened. The morning after the night I left, Maple Court no longer carried the orderly appearance Sienna always tried to flaunt before the neighbors. The first sunlight spilled into the wide windows and awakened a chain of things she had not anticipated. Lily, standing on the stair landing, was the first to see the chaos as Sienna's silhouette darted from room to room as if a major incident had just struck the house. Everything began with a very small sound. The coffee machine refused to start. Sienna tried 3 times again, each attempt more forceful, but the machine stayed silent. She frowned, opened her phone to check the device management app. The screen was blank. At that moment, Lily heard a soft click from the living room. The TV stopped working, its screen turning gray. "Jacob, is the house out of power?" Sienna called out loudly, irritation cutting through her voice. Jacob stepped out from his office, confusion on his face. He tried flipping the switch near the door, then another in the kitchen. Nothing changed. Power gone, Wi-Fi down, heating system unresponsive. The luxurious space Sienna liked to showcase online suddenly became an empty shell, with none of its conveniences functioning. Lily stood still, clutching her backpack, watching her mother spin in panic, as if caught in a storm of her own making. To Sienna, the house wasn't just a home. It was the stage where she performed perfection. And when the stage lights went out, what remained was the darkness that drove her to madness. Sienna grabbed her phone to call the power company. Lily heard every word, the voice tight but unable to hide growing anger. "That's strange. The customer code doesn't match. I'm the homeowner. Sienna Hart. Hart like H-A-R-T. Check again." Lily saw the subtle shift in the woman's expression, confidence melting into confusion, then into frustration. After a few seconds of silence, Sienna's voice sharpened. "No? Then whose name is on the contract?" A heavy pause. Then she clenched the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. "Arthur Brennan? But he doesn't live here anymore." Lily held back a sharp breath. The first thing she realized, her mother had never noticed that all the contracts, electricity, water, gas, internet, were in her grandfather's name. The second, Sienna never truly controlled the house the way she believed she did. While Sienna kept arguing, Jacob received a notification from the bank stating the auto payment card for utilities had been paused for a periodic verification, and the account holder needed to respond within 24 hours. Arthur, having left the house the night before, had not confirmed, so by procedure the system shut down all utilities to avoid mispayment. Not sabotage, not revenge, just standard protocol. But when ownership isn't in the hands of the person living there, the consequences look very different. "Why was my card declined? Why isn't the gas running? Where is the Wi-Fi?" Sienna screamed, for the first time revealing panic unmasked. Jacob checked the banking app. Lily saw his shoulders stiffen. "Sienna, our joint account has only $2,900 left." The room went silent as if all sound had been drained away. Sienna's spine seemed to freeze. She stared at Jacob as though he had spoken something impossible. "No, impossible. Your salary? The bonus from last month? My savings? There should be more than that." Jacob swallowed. "My salary was transferred to my separate account 6 months ago. You told me to do that to manage the finances more easily. And your savings? Where are they?" Sienna's eyes flicked to Lily, as if the 16-year-old child could answer for her. Lily looked down at the floor, unwilling to be dragged into the argument, but hearing every word, Jacob continued checking the house records. He tapped the owner information section, and the line that appeared made him step back half a pace. "Owner, Arthur Brennan, secondary, none mortgage, paid in full, 2009. Jacob shut his eyes. As clear as an equation that cannot be disputed, the house he lived in was not his, had never been his. Arthur had paid it off long ago, and when he moved Jacob's family into Maple Court, he had only let them stay. Sienna stepped forward, snatching her husband's phone. Before she finished reading the lines, the breath seemed to drain out of her. No, he told me he would leave this house to us. He promised me." Jacob tightened his jaw. "Dad never said anything like that to me." Sienna didn't answer, because she knew perfectly well that promise existed only in her imagination, the imagination built from greed and belief in her ability to manipulate everyone around her. The water heater shut off completely, giving one last dry click. Nothing worked anymore. The gleaming house full of smart devices was now nothing more than an expensive hollow shell. Lily stood on the stairs, looking down at the two adults spinning helplessly as the truth surfaced. In that moment, she understood one thing. Everything her mother had tried to build, the image of a perfect family, a comfortable life, the position of the reasonable wife, was founded on ground that did not belong to her. The empire Sienna tried to create with smiles for neighbors, live-streamed dinners, and sweetened lies was collapsing right before her eyes without anyone needing to push. All it took was Arthur leaving, and the truth finding its own way to the surface. The red folder lay still inside the safe, as if it understood that the moment it was meant to be opened had to match the right time, the right person, and the right state of heart. I sat in the old chair before the desk and turned on the lamp Margaret once used to mend the tiny stitches on Jacob's clothes when he was little. Its light was a soft, warm yellow, enough to illuminate every detail without hurting my tired eyes. I touched the edge of the folder, cold, firm, heavier than I remembered. Margaret never did anything halfway. I broke the seal. Inside were three things: a thick stack of papers, a silver USB drive, and a letter written in her soft but resolute handwriting. I took the letter first. My Arthur, if this letter has reached you, it means the doubt in my heart was right. I wish I were wrong, but that woman is not what she pretends to be. Read everything, then decide. Margaret. Only a few lines, but enough to shift the air in the study. I set the letter down and opened the first stack of papers. The printed lines were clear and tidy. An investigative report from a private investigator I never knew Margaret had hired. The name Sienna Hart appeared many times, but right beneath it was another name. Veronica Lynn Hart. I frowned. I had never heard Jacob or Lily mention it. The document stated plainly, Sienna had legally changed her name 6 years ago, right after an inquiry involving an elderly patient named Dr. Alan Pierce, a retired professor suspected of asset misappropriation through undue influence. I remembered that case clearly because Margaret once brought the newspaper into the living room and said, "Some people don't steal with knives, but with gentle words." At the time, I thought she was just philosophizing as usual. Now I understood. She saw the thread I had missed. I opened the next section of the documents. This one detailed Margaret's reasoning for establishing the Brennan Living Trust with attorney Evelyn Marks. On the very first page, Margaret's handwriting slanted in the corner. If someone ever hurts Arthur by stepping into our home with intent, the trust will shield him before he realizes he needs it. I paused. A strange feeling rose in my chest. Not pain, but a hollow ache, when you realize someone no longer in this world has still been standing guard against attacks you never fully saw. I kept reading. The following pages list the precise conditions Margaret asked Evelyn to include. All of Maple Court must remain in my name permanently. Any transfer of assets required my active consent and could not be replaced by anyone else. Okay, Jacob would have the right to use the property, but not to own it until I left this world or personally transferred it. Suddenly I understood why, for 2 years, Sienna had been unable to complete any paperwork regarding the house. At the bottom of the stack was a thin plastic folder labeled in red. Heart contingency. Open only when truly necessary. I took a deep breath and opened it. Immediately, a USB drive slid onto the desk. I plugged it into the computer. One audio file appeared. Its name was cold. Evidence VH2M4A. I pressed play. The first voice was Sienna's, yet not the voice she used in front of others. No sweetness, no softness, only a sharp, cutting tone I had never heard before. These sick old men are easy to control. You just have to poke the right weakness. Then another woman's voice, surely her mother, Vivian Hart. Don't let emotions get involved. Once they trust you, the assets flow straight into your pocket. I sat still. In my years as an engineer, I had heard warning sounds that meant a pipeline was about to rupture. They always had a distinct tone, but what I had just heard resembled no sound I knew. It was colder than metal. I opened the second file, again Sienna's voice, this time speaking about Dr. Pierce. He signed everything. Too bad the prosecutor stepped in too early. The air in the room thickened. Margaret hadn't just suspected. She knew, and she acted before it was too late. I opened the final page in the folder. Her familiar handwriting appeared once more. Arthur, If you are reading this, it means the woman named Hart has done something that hurt your heart. Trust me, that person did not enter your life by accident. Evelyn will know what to do. I cannot be there to warn you, so I leave you this preparation. I set the documents down. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the blend of hurt, gratitude, and the feeling of being protected by someone who no longer existed. Margaret had seen the storm long before it reached us, and I only now understood its shape. But unlike Sienna, I had spent my life repairing systems on the brink of collapse, and I knew this. Once you identify the leak, closing the right valve changes the entire pressure line. This red folder was the first valve, and I had just opened it. I arrived at Silver Pine Grill in the late afternoon, when sunlight passed through the wide glass panes and brushed across the familiar, matte-polished wooden table. That little diner had once been where my colleagues and I stopped after the reservoir survey in 1986. The reservoir the people of Evergreen Hills still say I was the quiet hero behind, the one who kept the whole region safe. Years passed. The diner changed owners a few times, but the smell of roasted coffee and the clinking of silverware remained exactly as they were. I chose the table by the window, where I could look out at the hill draped in old pines. Only a few minutes later, Lily walked in. Her blue coat still held the mountain chill, her hair pushed to one side by the wind. When her eyes met mine, I saw something I hadn't clearly seen in the past 2 years. Fear, carefully, hidden beneath the surface. Lily sat down, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. I hadn't yet asked anything when she exhaled, head lowered, as if she had held it in far too long. Grandpa, I'm sorry I couldn't say anything last night. I had placed my hand on the table, not touching hers, just giving her the safe space to finish. Lily looked up, her lips trembling slightly. I came because I don't want to live in that house anymore. I nodded slowly, letting her find her own rhythm. A moment later, Lily opened her phone, scrolled to a hidden photo folder, and slid the screen toward me. I accidentally logged into Mom's iCloud when I needed a history document. I didn't expect to see these messages. I looked down at the screen. The first message hit like a hammer to the chest. Don't rush. Old man is fading soon. Sent by Vivian Hart, Sienna's mother. Sienna's response was no warmer. Once he dies, Maple Court is ours. I set the phone down. Even after preparing myself with Margaret's red folder, seeing those words still tightened my breath. The pain didn't come from the word dies, but from the fact that Sienna's mother, the woman occupying the role of grandmother in Lily's eyes, saw my life as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Lily's eyes reddened, though she refused to let tears fall. They said things like that in the kitchen, right next to me. I thought I misheard, but when I saw the messages, I knew I hadn't. I stayed silent. I had faced severe emergencies, pipes about to burst, reservoirs cracking, groundwater, shifts that could trigger landslides, but nothing had ever weakened me the way hearing my granddaughter say those words did. Lily continued, Grandpa, I don't want to live in a house where people count the days until you're gone because it benefits them. I don't want to hear my mom whisper to Grandma that just a little more time and everything will be settled. She swallowed, staring at the worn edge of her school shoes. I want to live with you. I want to be somewhere I don't have to hear things like that every night. I tightened my grip on the chair arm to steady myself, not from anger at Lily, but at myself for allowing her to witness something she never should have. Behind the counter, Brenda, the server who'd been there more than 30 years, recognized me. She stopped polishing a glass, her eyes widening. Arthur Brennan? Good heavens, you're back? A few other customers turned their heads. Someone stood to greet me. I heard one of them whisper, That's Brennan, the Evergreen Reservoir engineer. That unexpected warmth made Lily look around, surprised to see her grandfather held in such respect. I gave them a small smile and returned my attention to Lily. You don't have to apologize for anything you said. Adults sometimes create shadows children are forced to walk through. But I promise you this, you won't have to live in that shadow much longer. Lily bit her lip, then spoke in a very small but steady voice. I trust you more than anyone in that house. I nodded, not to seem strong, but to let her know she wasn't alone. Lily, I said, this isn't your fault, and it isn't your father's fault. But some people will twist everything toward themselves, even family. I'll fix this pipeline, and once it's fixed, the water will flow the right way. She exhaled as if setting down a heavy weight. I placed a folded napkin on the table and said softly, You'll stay with me, but we need to do this legally, step by step. I need to speak with Evelyn Marks. If Margaret prepared that file, she surely prepared for you too. Lily's eyes brightened just a bit. So, can I bring my things to your house tonight? I looked out the window where the wind shook the tall pines. Tonight, that house has a place for you, and it always will. Our meeting ended in quiet, but the kind of quiet like the surface of a lake before the seasons turn, warning of a great change ahead. Lily walked out of Silver Pine Grill lighter on her feet, while I watched her go, knowing I had just set my hand on the control valve of a system long out of balance. And once that valve is turned the right way, the water will never run backward again. That afternoon, the weather in Evergreen Hills shifted. Gray clouds drifted over the old pines, as if waiting for a signal to break open. I drove to Evelyn Marks's office, the red brick building at the end of Oak Ridge Street, the place Margaret had visited for nearly a month before establishing the Brennan Living Trust. When I opened the door, the soft chime of metal wind bells struck together, a familiar sound that reminded me of Margaret's final weeks. She would walk out of this very place with eyes light but determined, like someone who had just finished the most important task of her life. Evelyn stood by the window, back straight, silver hair tied neatly at her nape. She turned when she saw me enter. No small talk, no pity, just a nod, the kind given by someone who had walked beside our family for decades. Arthur, she said in her steady, low voice, I assume what Margaret left you has finally been opened. I sat in the chair across from her and placed the red folder on the desk. Evelyn didn't touch it yet. She studied me, as though checking whether I was steady enough to hear the rest. Margaret prepared far more than you realize, Evelyn began. When she discovered Sienna had a questionable past, she created the trust immediately, not to protect the assets, but to protect you. I stayed silent. She continued. In Colorado, the law allows single-party consent recording, so every audio recording Margaret gathered is admissible if we need to take this to court. I glanced at the USB drive on the desk, suddenly heavy as stone. Evelyn pulled a deep blue folder from her drawer and placed it beside Margaret's red one. The label read, VH case, 5 years ago. I added this quietly, Evelyn said. It's an internal update from the prosecutor's office regarding the Alan Pierce case. Not public, but shared within the federal system. She slid the folder toward me. I opened it. The first page was a photo of Veronica Hart, Sienna, 6 years earlier. Long dark hair, sharp eyes without the polished confidence she shows now. The summary beneath sent a cold line through me. Subject exhibited patterns of undue influence over elderly individuals, including emotional manipulation and financial redirection. I turned the page. Copies of financial statements tied to Dr. Pierce appeared in clear detail. Money transferred from his account to an account controlled by Vivian Hart. The sum was substantial, over $400,000, accumulated through multiple transactions masked as care expenses. I looked up. Evelyn, this should be enough for the police to act immediately, shouldn't it? She shook her head, her expression cautious. Not yet. We have data, but not a complete chain of custody. To press charges, every piece of evidence must follow proper procedure with no gaps. I won't let them slip through because of a technical flaw. She emphasized each word. Margaret understood this. That's why she left instructions, not a directive to go to the police right away. I leaned back, breath heavy. Evelyn continued. Arthur, you're a gentle man, but you understand systems better than most. You built the reservoir for this region. You know if you close a valve too early, the wrong pressure can burst the pipeline. If you close it at the right moment, everything falls back into order. I looked at her and saw not just a lawyer, but the last friend Margaret entrusted to finish what she could not. I need you steady, Evelyn said. The red folder is only the first step. The rest will move quickly. But we must prepare so that when the truth comes out, nothing is questioned. I asked, How long have you known? Evelyn exhaled slowly. From the moment Margaret asked whether the trust could shield you from manipulation by someone within the family. After that, I began watching Sienna's movements, and now, it's time you know everything. She leaned forward and pulled a small box from her drawer, setting it on the desk. A red label marked it. Heart Contingency, Phase 2. This, Evelyn said, was left for you. Margaret instructed me to release it only once you understood the full story. I didn't touch the box, not out of fear, but because I understood. Every layer of truth revealed brought me closer to the storm Margaret had seen 5 years earlier. Evelyn looked at me directly. Arthur, Sienna doesn't just want Maple Court. She wants everything you have, and everything you plan to leave Lily. But Margaret stayed several steps ahead of her. I inhaled deeply, a cold, clear current moving through my chest. Pain and clarity woven together. So what's our next step? I asked. Evelyn gave a faint smile, the kind worn by a woman who has spent half her life reading human motives in complicated cases. We wait for the right moment, and when the valve turns at the perfect time, everything will shift. Outside, wind swept hard through the tall pines, as though the world itself sensed what was coming. I rose, gripping the folder in my hand. The day Margaret left this world, I thought I had lost half of myself. But as I stepped out of Evelyn's office, I understood that the rest of her had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to become the shield protecting me and Lily. And that moment is now. I was not present at Maple Court in the days that followed, but every piece of information from Lily, from the neighbors, from the HOA notice delivered to my mailbox, was enough to reconstruct the entirety of Sienna's mistakes. Mistakes like a pipeline tightened far beyond its limit. It doesn't crack immediately, but it will certainly burst once the pressure rises to the threshold. After the meeting at Silver Pine Grill, I felt the need to step back and observe. Evelyn had once said, "The impatient always reveal their openings. The patient are the ones who see the weak points." And Sienna, exactly as Margaret once predicted, was so impatient she walked straight into the mouth of the pit. It began when Sienna filed a complaint with the Maple Court HOA, accusing me of showing signs of cognitive decline, lacking capacity for financial decision-making, and potentially endangering the community if mishandling home systems. That alone showed she understood nothing about the law and nothing about me, a hydraulic engineer with 40 years of experience, one who had overseen a reservoir worth hundreds of millions, being accused of not being competent to manage. A house? Sienna had gone too far. I received a copy when the HOA mailed me a request to cooperate in a capacity evaluation. I just smiled. An HOA can fine someone for tall grass or improper parking, but it holds absolutely no authority to demand a cognitive evaluation of a resident. That can only come from a court, with a designated physician and a complete legal process. I brought the letter to Evelyn. She read it, nodded. Another link. The more she acts, the more evidence we gather of undue influence and intentional fabrication. But Sienna wasn't done. She then sent an email to Jacob's department head, CCing the HR office. The message, phrased in a tone of concern, was laced with humiliation. His father is no longer fully lucid. I worry he might sign documents incorrectly or misunderstand situations. Please consider temporarily removing Jacob from sensitive assignments so his family issues don't affect project progress. When Lily told me, I could picture Jacob's face reading that email, not angry but wounded, not because I was mentioned, but because Sienna used his name to smear his own father at his workplace. What Sienna didn't know, in tunneling safety projects, personal credibility is worth more than any resume. A single phrase like mentally unstable can force an entire review of Jacob's professional standing. Jacob had stayed silent for 2 years, but this time, silence was no longer a viable option for him. Sienna's biggest mistake arrived 3 days later at the Maple Court resident meeting. A neighbor, Mrs. Collins, called Lily that afternoon just to warn her. "You should hear this, Arthur," Lily said, handing me her phone. I opened the video. The quality wasn't high, but the audio was sharp enough to chill a listener. In the clip, Sienna stood in the community room, arms crossed, trying to maintain composure but growing louder with each sentence. "I'm telling you, he's slipping. Everyone should be prepared. It won't be long." The people in the room, mostly neighbors who had known me for years, looked stunned. Some exchanged glances, whispering. A young woman behind the camera protested, "Sienna, you shouldn't say that." But Sienna didn't realize she was being recorded. By the time the video circulated in the community group, it was too late. I watched the entire clip without saying a word. Not out of anger, but because I recognized exactly what Evelyn called self-created pressure. The greedy need no one to push them. They dragged themselves to the edge. I asked Lily, "Is this the first time you've heard your mother say things like this?" Lily hesitated, then shook her head quietly. "No, Grandpa. I've heard it for a long time, but no one else had. I just didn't know how to tell you." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "It's all right. You said it at the right moment." That evening, I brought the HOA letter, the printed email Sienna sent to Jacob's workplace, and the neighbor's video to Evelyn. She skimmed through each document, then lifted the corner of her mouth, not in triumph, but with the calm of someone watching an opponent, stepped straight into her own trap. "Arthur," Evelyn said, "we hardly need to do anything. She just handed you enough evidence of defamation, intentional fabrication of mental instability, and reputation harm. One more step, and the entire story she built collapses." I looked outside. Night wind tapped lightly against the window. Layers of cloud sped across the Evergreen Hills sky, like a sign that the storm Sienna had stirred was finally turning back toward her. And all I needed to do was stand firm. The rest, the truth would handle on its own. That morning, Evelyn Marks's office sat on the 4th floor of the old red brick building in downtown Evergreen Hills. The hallway was quiet, as if it had grown accustomed to witnessing family disputes no outsider could ever fully understand. I arrived 10 minutes early, not out of worry, but because I wanted to look at my reflection in the glass before stepping inside to see whether I still carried the calm of a man who had prepared everything. Jacob and Lily arrived shortly after. My son looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. Lily stood close beside him, her eyes still swollen from the past days of strain, yet steady with determination. I placed a hand on both their shoulders, a light touch, enough to remind them that today was not a battle they would face alone. The door opened. Evelyn stepped out, carrying a dark leather case, her gaze sharp as a blade freshly cleaned, ready to slice through whatever fog obscured the truth. "Arthur, it's time," she said quietly. Across the room stood Sienna's attorney, a middle-aged man with a deep blue tie, beside Sienna herself. She wore a silk scarf at her throat, attempting elegance, but her hands trembled. No matter how well she tried to hide it, panic clung to the edges of her eyes. Evelyn invited everyone to sit. No one spoke. The air felt heavy, like snow before a blizzard. I glanced toward Sienna. She avoided my eyes as though afraid of seeing something she could no longer manipulate. Evelyn began, "We are not here to argue today. We are here to clarify." Sienna's attorney blinked, perhaps assuming this was merely a tense family meeting. He had no idea Evelyn Marks would never enter a room unless every step had been arranged beforehand. She placed a small speaker on the table and pressed a button. A soft click sounded. Then a familiar voice, Margaret's, filled the room, clear and whole despite 5 years having passed. "I don't know any more, Sienna. I just want Arthur to be safe." And Sienna's reply, gentle but poisonous as a drop, slipped into clear water. "When you die, I'll take care of him in the way I want." Jacob jerked his hand against the chair arm. Lily covered her mouth. Sienna's attorney turned sharply toward his client, his expression shifting from neutral to alarmed in seconds. As for me, I had heard this recording before, but hearing it again, in a room full of people, revealed something. Margaret had prepared everything. She knew she didn't have much time, but she also knew the woman sitting across from me hid intent better than anyone realized. Evelyn shut off the speaker, then opened her laptop. "We're not done," she said. She projected messages pulled from the Vivian Sienna Cloud archive, evidence Lily had obtained. Vivian, "Don't push too fast. Old people slip into memory loss quickly." Sienna, "Once he dies, Maple Court is ours." For several seconds, no one in the room spoke. Sienna's attorney placed his hand on the table, voice low. "Sienna, you never told me any of this." Sienna clenched her silk scarf until the tendons in her hands stood out. She stammered, "It was just a joke. She fabricated—" Evelyn cut in, her tone calm as someone reading an inventory list. "Colorado is a single-party consent state. Margaret had full legal right to record. Every file we hold is within proper chain of custody. If needed, I will submit them directly to the FBI office in Denver." Sienna's attorney changed expression so fast it was almost startling. He turned to her. "You didn't tell me you were involved in the Pierce case in 2018. The statement made me look up sharply. Evelyn met my eyes and gave a slight nod, an acknowledgement that this was part of the red folder, Hart contingency. "Veronica Hart," Evelyn said, "also known legally as Sienna Hart, was a central figure in an undue influence case involving nearly $1 million. The case was dismissed due to lack of a direct witness. But at that time, she had no children, no husband, and no one to take the fall for her." Sienna shot to her feet. "I'm not—" That was the past. No one can prove." Her attorney stood at almost the same moment. "I'm terminating representation. You withheld essential information. I will not be part of a case with potential criminal implications." He gathered his papers, bowed politely to Evelyn, and left without giving Sienna a single glance. The door shut behind him, leaving a silence so thick I could hear Lily swallow. I looked at Sienna. For the first time in 2 years, she had no sweet facade, no confidence of a woman who believed everything was under her control. Only someone watching the net she had woven pull tight around herself. Evelyn slid a packet of documents toward her. "This is the relinquishment agreement. If you sign, we will not forward the file to the FBI. If you don't—" She didn't need to finish. Everyone understood the consequences. Fraud, conspiracy to defraud a vulnerable adult, undue influence, and those messages, too explicit to deny. Sienna looked at me, not apologizing, not remorseful, just the stare of someone who realizes she has lost, but cannot yet believe it. I rose. "I don't want anyone else to be hurt," I said slowly. "But if you think I will let Margaret or Lily be part of your game again, you are mistaken." Sienna's hand trembled, but she didn't pick up the pen. Jacob tightened his fists, but for the first time, the trembling wasn't fear. It was the resolve of someone who understood the truth had finally surfaced and could not be buried again. Lily looked at me, eyes bright with both fear and courage. The meeting ended as Evelyn gathered the documents, leaving Sienna staring blankly at the unsigned agreement. A storm had begun long ago, but today it finally broke exactly where it needed to. And I knew this was only the first public shock. When I left Evelyn's office that day, the sky over Evergreen Hills carried a deep gray mixed with the blue tint of a late-season storm. I knew a chain collapse was coming, not because I wanted to destroy anyone, but because once the truth is opened, it never agrees to lie still again. And Sienna, once so certain of her cleverness, suddenly became the person standing at the center of a storm, spinning down toward everything she tried to hide. A few days after the confrontation at Evelyn's office, Lily called me at 6:30. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, rather from witnessing something she never expected to unfold so quickly. "Grandpa, she was just fired." I set my coffee cup on the wooden table. A brief silence passed before Lily continued. HR reviewed her old records. They found the name Veronica Hart tied to the lawsuit in Arizona. The company is worried about reputational risk, so they terminated her contract immediately. I wasn't surprised. Sienna worked in PR, an industry built on image. A single crack in her background was enough for a PR company to reconsider everything she had built, let alone a legal name change in an abandoned investigation. A week later, the second wave arrived, this time from the Maple Court HOA. A thick envelope was mailed to Cedar Ridge Lane for me, but included beneath it was a copy of the email sent to Sienna. Due to disruptive behavior, inappropriate statements during the resident meeting, and unauthorized interference with another member's privacy, we are suspending your access to all community facilities for an indefinite period. In other words, she was barred from Maple Court, a place she once treated as her personal stage for displaying orderliness and prestige, now shut its doors on her completely. If it had been someone else, I might have felt sorry. But remembering how she spoke about me in that neighborhood meeting, he's slipping already, I understood that every outcome now was part of a lesson she needed to face. But the largest storm came from somewhere no one expected: the residents of Evergreen Hills. Neighbors who once kept neutral, now collectively switched sides. The clip of Sienna standing in the community room, releasing each word like a verdict, "He's slipping already," spread across the community group in hours. Some reposted it with captions like, "If this is how she talks about her father-in-law in front of neighbors, imagine what happens behind closed doors." Sienna had once organized small events, managed community outreach, coordinated sponsorships for the Green Fund, but a single short video, not even 8 seconds, erased her entire reputation. That evening, Lily's phone rang nonstop. Sienna's former friends texted her daughter, "We can't support your mother anymore. She's too cruel. Don't drag us into this." I imagined Sienna reading those messages, her hands shaking, putting the phone down because she couldn't bear to open it again. Losing acquaintances is one thing, but working in PR and losing face in your own community, that is a full stop. Around 8 that night, Evelyn called me. "Arthur, Arizona just sent a verification request." I stood still at the window, looking down at the darkening road between the pines. "About Veronica Hart?" I asked. "Yes, the Dr. Pierce case in 2018, when investigators reviewed the file and saw she happened to marry, right after the case was dismissed. They want to determine whether this was part of a deliberate behavioral pattern." I exhaled, not relief, but the awareness that the final loop of truth had closed. Evelyn added, her voice carrying the familiar note of caution, "I know you don't want anyone dragged into criminal proceedings, but Arthur, this time the inquiry is coming from them, not from me." I understood that, and I understood that everything Margaret prepared in the red folder wasn't meant to ruin anyone's life. It was meant to prevent tragedy from repeating. Sienna once believed she controlled everyone, but she forgot one thing. When the truth is exposed, no one controls anything. least of all reputation. That night, I sat in my study at Cedar Ridge Lane, under the same soft yellow light that had carried me and Margaret through 40 winters. I didn't feel joy, no triumph, only a quiet sadness, the sadness of watching someone fall, not because they were pushed, but because they chose the wrong steps in the dark. But another feeling slipped into my thoughts, a sense of readiness, because I knew Sienna was not completely defeated. Someone like her would still struggle, and when a desperate person begins to struggle, the damage rarely stops with themselves. I closed my notebook and looked up at the old photo of Margaret and me. "Do you see it?" I whispered. "What I'm doing is only completing what you began." Outside, night winds swept through the pines, blowing out a few neighbors' decorative lights. The wind was cold but clear, like the way truth moves through a person's life, cold but never wrong. And I could feel it. A new phase of this confrontation was about to unfold. Cedar Ridge Lane was colder than usual that day. The sky hung with a heavy layer of clouds, as if holding on to a story it wasn't ready to release. I sat in my study, the recorder placed in front of me, my hand hesitating before pressing play, as if giving myself one last breath before letting my son face the truth that had been hidden from him for 7 years. Around 4 in the afternoon, Jacob's pickup truck pulled up to the porch. I recognized the sound of the door closing, the familiar noise of a child who once ran across this yard, once held a hammer to help me fix the fence, once stood close to Margaret in the kitchen whenever the smell of apple pie filled the hallway. But the man stepping onto the porch today was no longer that child. His shoulders sagged, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had been dragging a heavy bag on his back for far too long. So long he no longer knew when or how to put it down. Jacob knocked once, then let himself in, an old habit that hadn't faded. "Dad." His voice was hoarse, apologetic, and also searching for something he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. I gestured for him to sit. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds, the only sound the steady ticking of Margaret's old clock on the wall. Finally, I placed the recorder on the table. "You need to hear this." Jacob looked at the device as though it might threaten his entire life, but he didn't look away. I pressed the button. Margaret's voice filled the room, gentle, tired, but still the voice of the woman who once kept this family from collapsing. "Arthur, if I go first, protect Jacob. He trusts too easily." Jacob blinked. Hearing his name in his mother's voice was like a touch from another world, one that made his heart clench. Then came Sienna's voice, cold, slick, and disturbingly casual. "When you die, I'll take care of him, in the way I want." Jacob's hands tightened until they turned white. A vein rose along his neck. Not anger, pain. A painful mix of shame, realization, and guilt, all colliding at once. I let the recording run until the end, without pausing, without adding a single word. When the final sound faded, Jacob no longer tried to stay composed. He bent forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, shoulders trembling without a single tear falling. I had never seen my son break like that, not even the day Margaret died. A long moment passed before he whispered, "Dad, I let her lead me for 7 years. I believed everything Sienna said. I thought I was protecting my family." I answered slowly, "It's not your fault. Manipulators always know exactly where the softest spot is." Jacob looked up. His eyes were red but clear, like someone stepping out of a dark room after too long. I doubted, but she always told me, "That's just your father's memory slipping. You forgot again." Little by little. I believed you were declining. I believed things that weren't real. I nodded. People who are gaslit eventually trust lies simply because they're repeated often enough, at the exact moments they're most vulnerable. "Your mother knew," I said. "She didn't leave these things to condemn anyone. She left them to save you, and to save Lily." Jacob covered his face. This time he cried openly, without trying to hide, without shame. It was the sound of a man finally seeing the rope that had bound him for years. I stood and walked toward him. Since Margaret passed, he and I had never hugged, not out of resentment, but because some distances grow out of long stretches of silence. I placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, and in that moment, I saw how much he resembled Margaret. The quiet sadness, the instinct to blame himself before blaming anyone else. I pulled my son into an embrace. He collapsed against my shoulder the way he once did when he fell off his bicycle at age 7. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let you suffer those insults. I'm sorry I let Lily live with someone like her. His voice broke. I squeezed his shoulder gently. You came back in time. All that matters is you're not running from the truth anymore. Jacob inhaled sharply, like someone surfacing from water after nearly drowning. When he let go, his eyes had changed. No longer blinded, no longer deceiving himself. Dad, let me stand with you now. I won't let Sienna drag this family down any further. I looked at him, feeling not relief, but restoration, the kind Margaret once prayed for. All right, I said. From here on, we walked together. Outside, the evening wind swept across the porch, spinning a few dry leaves into a small spiral. But inside this house, for the first time in years, the wind had shifted, and I knew the battle had entered a new phase, one where the antagonist faced not just me, but the very son she once thought she held in her hand. The day Evelyn called to tell me that Sienna wanted a private meeting to negotiate, I wasn't surprised. People like her never accept defeat immediately. They always believe that one more conversation, one more manipulation, one more well-timed tear will turn everything around. But this time, the stage no longer belonged to Sienna. That afternoon, I went to Evelyn's office only to observe, not to intervene. The sky over Evergreen Hills was darker than usual, the wind carrying the damp scent of an approaching rain. I stood behind the frosted glass as Sienna stepped into the conference room, her figure thinner, her movements uncertain. No silk scarf, no PR smile, only the unsteady posture of someone who had lost her footing. Evelyn sat upright, fingers interlaced, expression unreadable. She wasn't the type to scold, but her silence alone could make anyone understand their position. Sienna spoke first, her voice rough. We can negotiate. I don't want this to go any further. Evelyn tilted her head, replying calmly. Negotiate what? Benefits? Reputation? Or the mercy you never showed Mr. Brennan and your husband's daughter? Sienna swallowed hard. I saw her hands tremble as she set them on the table. I can sign part of it. I just want to stay in contact with Lily. She needs me. Evelyn looked directly into her eyes. An expression like a closed door, one the person outside no longer had the key to enter. Lily does not need someone who is willing to gamble another person's life for assets, Evelyn said, enunciating every word, and more importantly, you no longer have the standing to ask. Sienna bit her lip, but tried to hold her ground. I was pushed into a corner. I just wanted to protect my family. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She opened her leather case, took out a small USB drive, and placed it on the table between them. Then listen to this. She pressed play. A woman's voice emerged, older, firm, cold. Vivian Hart, Sienna's mother. If you fail, deal with it yourself. Don't call me again. Don't drag me in. I've paid the price once for something like this. I had never heard the woman before. The voice was sharp, icy, lacking even a trace of compassion for her own daughter. Sienna broke down instantly, not a theatrical cry of indignation or anger, but complete collapse, the broken sobs of someone realizing the only family she thought she had was abandoning her too. Evelyn paused the recording. She didn't look triumphant, nor mocking, only resolute. This is the final proof that your motive was not affection, but a repeating pattern of undue influence in the Hart family. Arizona is asking about the Pierce case, and if I send them this file, you will have no chance left." Sienna lowered her head onto the table, all traces of professionalism or pride gone. She whispered, "Then, what do I have to do to stop all of this?" Evelyn slid the paperwork toward her. "Sign everything. Return all rights that do not belong to you. Withdraw from Maple Court. Relinquish all claims, involvement, or legal requests concerning Lily now and in the future. And you are absolutely forbidden from contacting Mr. Brennan again." Sienna picked up the pen with a shaking hand. The moment the first stroke of ink touched the page, I saw her shoulders collapse like a door losing its hinges. The next part of the agreement, the clause relinquishing parental rights over Lily, made her hesitate. Not because she loved the girl, but because Lily had been her proof of a happy family, a prop that completed her social facade. She signed, quietly, without lifting her eyes. Evelyn said only one thing: "Thank you for finally choosing the right path." It wasn't forgiveness, just the closure of a conflict no longer worth prolonging. When Sienna left the office, I followed a few steps behind without revealing my presence. She walked slowly, like someone drained of all energy. Outside, a light rain fell, the yellow streetlights casting a dull glow over her face. Bare of makeup, stripped of sharpness, left only with emptiness. When she returned to Maple Court to collect her things, I did not go. But Lily told me, "Grandpa," all the neighbors walked past her without saying a word. No greeting, no question. They just looked and turned away. A quiet humiliation, but deep, far sharper than any insult spoken aloud. The woman who once tried to control the entire neighborhood, who believed she stood above everyone, now reduced to someone people avoided like a fading shadow. Sienna left Maple Court in silence, with no friends, no family, no one following behind her. The automatic gate closed right after her car exited. No one ran after her. No one tried to stop her. What remained was a heavy stillness, the silence of a community that had finally seen a person's true face. And what stayed with me wasn't victory, but the moment Lily watched her stepmother leave, her eyes holding no hatred, no joy, only the relief of a child finally returned to a life that made sense. One cycle had ended. One dark chapter had closed. But there was still one last task I had to complete, something Margaret had left in the red folder, something even Evelyn said, "Arthur, this is the part only you can finish." 1 year later, Cedar Ridge Lane looked entirely different, not because of new paint or a repaired fence, but because the breathing of the 3 people living there had finally settled into the rhythm Margaret once hoped for. Light, steady, no shadows threading between each meal. People say time doesn't heal everything. I no longer believe that. It's not time that heals. It's what we choose to do with the time. I repaired the porch roof with Jacob on weekend mornings. My son no longer carried the heaviness he had last year. He walked every afternoon, tended to the corner of the garden Margaret once cared for. Sometimes he sat by the old mailbox, running his fingers along the wooden frame as if touching the apology he still owed his mother. Lily grew like a young pine in the valley, quiet but full of life. She spent many evenings sitting in the yard sketching small pencil drafts of rooftops, window frames, skylights, technical drawings in which I saw a reflection of Margaret's younger self. One early April morning, Lily burst into the kitchen with a thick envelope, her eyes shining. "Grandpa, I got the architecture scholarship from the Denver Institute." Jacob hugged her so tightly she laughed. I stood there watching them, feeling as if someone had turned on a light inside a room that had been dim for years. But what stopped me was the last line in the scholarship letter. "The fund is provided through the Brennan family legacy, according to the directives of Mrs. Margaret Brennan." The amount, $210,000. I had to sit down. She had prepared everything. Even the path of Lily's education, the granddaughter Margaret held for only 6 short years, had been arranged long before I understood what I still had left to protect. Jacob finished reading and began to cry in the quiet way he once cried at age 5. Lily pressed the letter to her chest, whispering, "Grandma still remembered me, even though I thought I'd forgotten her face." I placed my hand on her head. "No one forgot you. Sometimes love sits in a place we don't open until the right moment." We celebrated the scholarship with a walk through Evergreen Park. Me, Jacob, and Lily, 3 people walking slowly under the old elms. Dry spring blossoms drifted with the wind, and then I saw her, Sienna, standing about 30 meters away under a tree, holding a worn cloth bag, her once meticulously kept hair now lightly tousled by the wind. No makeup, no heels, no one standing beside her. She looked toward us, or rather toward the empty space she once believed she could occupy and hold firm. She didn't move closer, didn't say anything, just stood there with hollow eyes, like someone who still didn't understand how life could slip out of her hands so quickly. Jacob noticed first. I felt his body tense for a moment, then relax. He turned to Lily and straightened her collar, as if the scene behind us no longer had anything to do with the family he was choosing to rebuild. Lily didn't look toward Sienna. She was busy telling me about the sloped roof model she wanted to design. Her voice rose and fell naturally, untouched by the fear that once filled her nights because of her stepmother. And I looked at Sienna for exactly 2 seconds. No anger, no triumph, only acknowledgement, like looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. When we walked away, none of us looked back. Sienna didn't take a step toward us. She faded into the afternoon crowd like a shadow that no longer belonged to this place. That evening I sat on the porch steps, the warm yellow light falling across the old boards where Margaret once kept her lavender pots each summer. I felt no heaviness any more, no question left unanswered. I had only one thing to say, not to Sienna, but to myself and to anyone who had been hurt by trust placed in the wrong hands. I wrote in my journal, then read it aloud as if sending it into the darkening sky. I did not need to destroy her. I only stopped saving her. Not revenge, not victory, just the end of a cycle, a release at the right moment, so the rest of life could be peaceful. The wind passed under the porch roof. A chapter closed. Another opened, quieter, steadier, the way kindness always arrives, softly but surely. In the end, looking back at everything that happened, I understand that justice doesn't always need a gavel or loud declarations. It arrives in the moment you learn to let go of what must be let go. Hold on to the people worth holding, and rise when your heart finally stops being afraid. If this story reminds you of a wound, a memory, or a moment you had to step out of the dark to protect yourself, I hope you'll leave a little period, so I know you're still here, still resilient, still believing that kindness, though slow, always finds its way. And if you want to hear more everyday justice stories like this, I would be grateful for a subscription, so I know that when I open a new story, you'll be the first to hear it. Thank you for staying until the very end.